We are back on the Zero Hour. I am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. I've long said on this program and elsewhere that the left will not get as far as it needs to get if it's not able to tell stories to the American people, stories that they understand, stories that they resonate with emotionally and intellectually, stories that change the political narrative. My next guest works for, I believe it's a new organization that seeks to do exactly that. I wanted to talk to him about a couple of causes in particular they're involved with. Max Berger is editorial director. I think I got that right. Editorial director for A More Perfect Union, which can be found at perfectunion.us. And he joins us now. So Max Berger, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And before we go any further, anything to add, clarify, correct, delete about my description of your organization?
No, that was great. It's a group of us who came together after the presidential campaign, some of us from the Bernie campaign, Warren, some Markey folks, and even a straggler from Castro or two, and wanted to figure out how to help build out the progressive infrastructure. And it seems like there's really a gap, as you identified, in our ability to speak directly to the American people and tell stories about what's happening to working folks in this country. So that's what we've been focusing on.
And, it seems to me that one of the major focuses of your organization is producing videos that tell stories. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have some other strategies you're planning to move into, but so far, most of what I've seen are videos that can be found on YouTube and at your website. Is that that fair too?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We've been really video focused. Faz and Nico actually work together at Think Progress. And so I think there's a lot that we take from sort of the hard-hitting editorial perspective that they had there in terms of doing real rigorous, sometimes journalism, sometimes more kind of explainer type
right.
content, but
just journalism too.
Yeah, it's a different form of journalism.
Right.
But instead, in 2006 or whatever, when they started Think Progress, blogging was a really useful method to try to reach folks, and now it seems like a lot more people are watching videos. So that's what we've been more focused on, and I think over time we will branch out into other types of content, but that's really been our focus thus far.
And for people who don't know, the people you're referring to, Faz Shakir, who was the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders in 2020. I was on the 2016 campaign, but obviously there's a lot of overlap there. Faz was also with the ACLU, which I think is where I first encountered him, and he was first on the program. Nico Pitney was with the Huffington Post, now HuffPost, where I also wrote for many years. You have Josh Miller Lewis from Bernie Sanders and so on. I believe you come from the Warren campaign, among other places. So you guys have got the political left base, particularly in terms of electoral campaigns, pretty well covered. Now, there were a couple videos you did that particularly caught my attention and that I wanted to talk about. And one of them, because it's a major theme and a major issue for me and a lot of us right now, is care. Home care, more humane care for people on Medicaid and on other programs, elder care. There's a significant amount of money right now in the Democratic proposal, some $400 billion for home care. And you guys did a video about that recently that Faz Shakir sent around to a group of us. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that video was one of the favorite projects that I've gotten a chance to work on so far. We've been working with some disability rights activists who have been really helpful in trying to put us in touch with directly impacted folks. And as you named, this issue is just, it's so crucial because there are millions and millions of people who are impacted. So it's a pretty multifaceted problem, right? Like what we focused on was the waiting lists, which is what the $400 billion in the American Jobs Plan would help alleviate. There's a waiting list right now for folks to get a waiver so that they can spend the money that is apportioned for them in Medicare on more individualized forms of care, home health care, home health aides, other forms of support that are needed for people who are suffering from disabilities and need additional help to live more independent lives. And right now, I don't have the figures at hand, but I believe there's something like 850,000 families who are on this waiting list who have somebody that they're taken care of. And in many cases, in the case that we highlighted, there's a woman, a young woman with developmental disabilities who, had autism amongst other challenges. And so her family was really providing a tremendously high, degree of support. And, I've been directly impacted by this issue. I'm sure many of us have. When you have a family member who requires that degree of support, it really just, it takes over your whole life. And this young woman, Lila, has a younger brother, who is, very limited in his life and his opportunities because his parents are so focused on taking care of her. And so we made a video about Lila and her family and what it would mean for them to receive a waiver, to be off this waiting list and to be able to have the care that she needs without, spending all their money on it or doing 100% of it themselves. And, it's also a huge issue in terms of the workers, right? Because
Absolutely.
Many of these home healthcare aides are doing, just God's work, taking care of people, taking care of our loved ones, seeing them out of this world. And that is incredibly important. It's something that when you have a loved one, you value more than just about anything, right? But you may or may not have the resources to pay them a livable wage. And if you don't, then they don't have that. And, a lot of these jobs are not well paid. Home health aides do not make a ton of money. Many of them make less than $15 an hour.
And sometimes significantly less, I think.
Yeah. And it's the disparity between kind of the importance of the work and how it's compensated is so dramatic. And in our reporting, we also talked to folks who run some of these programs and hire home health aides, and they spoke to the challenges that they face in retaining their best employees because they don't get paid enough. And so it's a very difficult job. You're dealing with, it's pretty tough. Some of the tasks that you're asked to do. Any of us who have had to take care of an elderly family member or disabled family member with disabilities know that it is a painstaking task sometimes. And the folks who do that work face a huge degree of burnout because they're also not particularly well compensated. And a lot of the times they have very difficult schedules. So, one of the other issues, it's a little bit less clear in the legislative language exactly how they're going to do this, but I know that the intention is to use some of that funding to raise the kind of floor for salaries for home health aides, which is, I think, another really crucial part of this as more of our economy moves in the direction of care. And, we have an aging population. It's so important that we have the resources to take care of people, and the people who are responsible for that work are being well compensated. And that's just not how it works right now. So, the $400 billion in the American Jobs, or excuse me, the American Families Plan would be a humongous step in the right direction. And I think it was a surprise to many folks that some of the advocates were as successful as they were in getting that in. I think I don't know the full extent of what they were asking for previously, but I do know that was seen as a pretty significant win on their part. And so now I think it's just a question of making sure that it makes it into the final reconciliation bill. And that actually passes. So what we see our job here is just kind of letting folks know about how big of a difference that would make in all these people's lives, and that this is already in the bill. It's progressives, we have gotten very good at kind of highlighting things that we don't have yet, right? That are a step or two beyond what is currently politically possible or what's currently being discussed. And that's obviously really important as well in terms of pushing things forward and fighting the bigger fights. But we thought that this was also an opportunity to let people know about a pretty substantial win that has made it into the initial proposal. And so want to do everything we can to lift up the fact that it's a pretty big deal, and then it might actually pass.
It's interesting, Max, because and this I have a couple of thoughts about it. Again, we're talking with Max Berger of Perfect Union, more Perfect Union, excuse me. I have a couple of thoughts. One of which is, this is a topic that lends itself so well to somebody telling their own personal story, which is what your video does. But it's also, to me, sometimes when you kind of pick and choose the issues you're going to talk about, promote, because there are multiple many, many, many good causes out there. To me, one of the things that makes this important, besides the fact that would mean so much to so many people in my own life. I've been through it. I've written about it. The caregiving side of it, it's tremendously draining, even if you're not doing the physical work. And I had a doctor once take me aside and say, "I'm worried about you."
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
You look pale. You don't look well. Because
oh yeah. That's why I say it's 850 families. You know what I mean? It's not just 850 individuals. It's everyone who loves those people and cares for them now. And so yeah.
So, and this, and so to make this 800, these 800,000 people and their families better off is a huge, huge cause and important in and of itself. But it also, to me, has this kind of meta importance, if I can put it that way, because promoting it helps people think about government and society in a better way, if you know what I mean. It helps raise people's awareness, which I think they had more at one point, but we've lost in a lot of places. Raise people's awareness that, government can make my life better. It can make your life better. It can make the world a more humane place for the people who help us in our daily lives, and that maybe we don't even think enough about. So I think it's, I hate to use the term consciousness raising, but I think it's an issue that not only really matters in and of itself, but does help people get a better perspective on their government and their society. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's, I think that's the larger battle that we're fighting. And I think for us as an organization, that's a huge part of what we want to try to change. I think in the United States, people do not have an expectation that other people will help them, that society will help them, that there should be certain things that we take for granted that are not hard, that are made easy by the fact that the other people around you in your society also want and need those things. And so we'll provide them for each other through the government, right? That's not something that people by and large take for granted. People feel like they're on their own. And as you named, this is such an intimate and personal issue. It cuts really deep for people. If you imagine a family member that you love in need of care, if you can't give them the care that they need, that's one of the hardest things that you can experience as a human being. And so for you to imagine, oh wait, there could be a solution to that. That's not just me hustling, or not just me getting lucky, or not just me, breaking my back or busting my budget to make sure that, something happens that seems impossible, but that that's just something that we can take for granted as a society, that we care about each other, that we care for each other, that there's basic public services that allow for us to live decent, humane lives. I always joke, it's like, being a human being is hard enough. Like, we don't have to make it any harder for ourselves and each other by, it's casting each other aside. And the U.S. really is pretty unique in the respect, in the extent to which we are really on our own, which is something that we have done. We have done that to ourselves. That is a set of conscious decisions that were made and now policies that exist. And I also tend to agree that the consciousness, you have to change the consciousness in order to change the politics. People have to have a sense of social solidarity, that they're a part of a larger whole, for them to feel like we as a people can achieve these kind of basic needs through collective means. And if people don't believe that, it's very hard to convince them that we can do these things, even if it would benefit them, personally. So I think that's a big part of what the left now is trying to achieve. There's this saying that's kind of goes around sometimes on Twitter of like, we live in a society, which is sort of a rejoinder to the Thatcher quote of like, there's no
right. Oh, yes.
society, right? And I think it's like that is an ideological argument at this point, right? Like there are people who disagree. No, we don't live in a society. Like
right.
You're in a brutal reality of just individuals, contesting with each other for resources. And
I actually love that this conversation has gone this way, Max Berger, because, the other meme, obviously, that you see everywhere, apes together strong, right, from Planet of the Apes. But, the way to me, one of the ways for the left to communicate that, and I think I sense this is, in the DNA of what you guys are doing as well. One of the ways to communicate that is by saying your decency, stranger, hey, stranger, anonymous voter, as an individual, is probably such that if you saw a person on crutches and one of the crutches broke and they fell, you'd help them get up because you're a decent person and we're here to help each other. Well, the best way to help disabled people overall in their lives is by working together as a society, as a national community. Then your values, the same values that make you help a person when they fall, should have you support policies that help people together, a group of people, the best way that we can, which is together. So, I think that's part of it. And I think that the other part of it is I just completely lost it. That never happens to me. But there was another really important part of it. Oh, I know what it was. That those large groups of people who think of the disabled as the other, right? Capital O or in air quotes, and the poor as the other, don't realize the statistics that, I don't know how many, half of all Americans cycle in and out of poverty at least in 1 year of their lives, or, so many of us are disabled in ways that aren't impinging our functionality, at least not yet, or we will be disabled, or somebody in our family will be disabled. So we're not just helping a stranger, we're helping ourselves.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. And, I think the first point is also so crucial in pointing to what the role of media needs to be, and how, and also how, what we're up against, right? Because as you said, human beings evolved over millions of years to exist in relatively small communities in which you could probably, recognize most of the people that you would see in a given day. And you develop a strong sense of solidarity with that village, right? Like you know that your well-being is dependent on the well-being of your community, and being a part of a national community is just much more abstracted, right? Like most of your experience of what it means to be a part of that community happens through the media. And so whatever you're looking at on your screen or your screens now is going to dictate what it means to you to be a part of that community, and who you feel like is a legitimate part of that community, and what that community does for and with each other. And I think so much of what we're up against is that people just don't feel that basic sense of solidarity. And part of it is that there's really no part of the media whose job it is to make them feel that. And in fact, if anything, most of the media's job is to mitigate against that feeling, right? To make that feeling less likely to happen, because it is frankly not in the interest of the ruling class, of the corporate elite, of however you want to define it, for people to feel that strong sense, right? And I think we're in this incredibly strange moment right now where it's like, and you know, there were some really great, I saw really funny versions of TikToks of this, of, you know, corporations, I think, in their eternal quest to just find what's going to speak to people in order to sell them stuff, have really recognized that this sense of solidarity is what's speaking to people right now. So you have all these, like, you know, Ford Motor Company cares about your law. You know what I mean? And it's like, especially during the pandemic, you know, I think, and so you see it in these ads where you're like, damn, like we do care about each other, and that's why I should shop at Walmart, you know,
and buy a Jeep like Bruce Springsteen drive.
Right, exactly. And but I think I think it shows that even the most profit-seeking parts of the media apparatus recognize that there's a deep and profound sense of alienation that people feel, and a desire for there to feel solidarity and connection. And you know, I think there's not a lot of mechanisms that currently exist within the media landscape that are articulating what that solidarity is meant to look like or feel like, you know. So I think it's hard for people to feel it if they don't see it where they're learning these things.
And of course, our media ecosystem, Max Berger, is not structured to promote these kinds of stories. You know, it makes me think of after the 2008 crash, a very I won't name him, but a really famous or prominent progressive journalist, filmmaker, television, you know, I mean, really, really well known. It was kind of like he kind of took me under his wing for some reason. So I was talking to him. He had participated in the making of really a terrific documentary about a Midwestern city that had been devastated by globalization and then the 2008 crisis, and really well done. And he said, you know, he was really depressed afterwards because he said it barely got broadcast, if at all. Maybe it was just on the net. He said, you know, if this had been made in the 60s or even the 70s, there would have been congressional hearings about what to do. You know, millions of people would have seen it on CBS or whatever.
Right.
And then there would have been, Congress would have gotten together. What do we do about the people who, you know, are so desperate in these cities? And now it's kind of like it gets buried. It's all who's outraged at who over what. And, it doesn't get translated into political action. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on how to target that. Obviously, one thing to do you're doing, which is when there's a good proposal like this one.
Yeah.
But any other thoughts on how to?
Yeah. I mean, I think over time we've seen the kind of replacement of the monoculture media landscape that was created through local monopolies in newspapers and TV, you know, the networks, get replaced by the monopolies of platforms, right? And so it's a similar degree of kind of corporate control, but with zero quality control. So we kind of have the worst of both worlds, right? Where you have a small group of people who are benefiting, who are really determining what people see and what's available to folks, but at the same time, they do not claim to have any editorial, you know, by their own, you know, they're not news organizations. They don't want to be adjudicating truth. And, you know, actually on the one hand, I think that's a pretty valid argument, but I think really augurs in the direction of a need to break up these monopolies, you know, because I think the greatest threat that we face as a society in terms of how we consume information is that there is a gigantic portion of the population, I want to say somewhere between a quarter and a third, who are just basically untethered from reality in any kind of objective way. And that is a really, really scary place to be, because once that connection has been broken, you can get those folks to do just about anything. And, you know, I don't mean to take us in too intensive a direction, but I'm Jewish, you know, that motivates a lot of what got me into this work. If you read any Hannah Arendt, that, you know, when people stop, recognizing any sense of truth and grappling with the truth, you can have them do really horrible things. And so, I think if we don't get that under control, if we don't start breaking up these giant platforms and bringing back local media and giving people sources of news that are grounded in reality. And I don't mean to just kind of take us back to the kind of post-war equilibrium, I think that we will see an evolution of people who are coming at it from a much more ideological perspective. And that I think is good. I think this notion of neutrality and bipartisanship or nonpartisanship in media is, I think just a historical relic of a particular period. So I'm not saying that we need to get back to that exactly, but
No, but we need. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no.
we need. First of all, even if you're doing like I consider what I do advocacy journalism, if you don't have like a fanatical obsession with telling it accurately with
Right.
truth. To me, truth is the ultimate progressive value, right? And a lot of people are like, well, I don't care if it really happened, Trump's Pete tape or whatever. I'm just going to say it because it hurts him. No, I think truth is super important.
Yeah.
But I think transparency, it's like, hey, I'm a progressive. This is
Mhm.
what I believe. These are my values, but I will never knowingly lie to you. I
Right.
think that, and so I'm right with you on all of this, but also, it's not, the media, they tell us they're about objectivity, but they're really about balancing two
Right.
political parties and not adjudicating between them, which is not truth telling or objectivity,
No,
right?
and also, I think the other piece of this that I just want to say from like a big picture perspective is that all these things are politically constructed, right? Like there's no kind of media ethics that are totally separate from a political consideration of who's going to be hurt by those ideas of what it means to do journalism or who's going to be helped by it. And the example you choose is a great one. This idea of a marketplace of ideas and the fairness doctrine, being something that we need to discard. That was a conscious political effort that took place in the 70s and 80s by conservatives to ensure that what it meant to be objective meant that you represent these two viewpoints and that's your job, and that objectivity did not require getting at truth between those competing perspectives. And I think journalism still is struggling with this. Like if you look at how hard it was for them to call Trump a liar, when
Yeah. And
plain, as clear as day.
And let's look, let's use you as an example. Let's say the Democrats assert that Max Berger is a Baptist, and the Republicans assert that he's a Buddhist. It's like, well, my job as a journalist isn't be to say, well, some say he's a Baptist, some say he's a Buddhist. I should go ask you, and if you say you're Jewish, I should say he's Jewish. I shouldn't say, well, there are those who assert, that's not journalism. That's
Right.
not finding out the truth. That's, as Stephen Colbert said in his finest moment, that's stenography. So we are definitely on the same page there. And Max Berger, before I let you go, I do have to bring up that you guys did a video really close to my heart on Spotify. Because I'm a songwriter, and there's a sort of pre-punk shock rock group from the early 1970s that owes me at least $40 in royalties, and I want to get those songwriter royalties. And Spotify is not going to help me. And it's funny actually because you have a group on. I've heard of them. Guy from a group called Downtown Boys, and I actually wrote a song called Downtown Boys, which I'm told was a little bit of a hit in Italian underground radio in the 70s.
All right.
And but I doubt they ever heard it. I don't know where they got their name, but I doubt it. They got it from that because it's super obscure. But the guy was articulate and smart. Everybody in that video was smart. I encourage people to watch it. Were you directly involved in the production of that?
I was less involved in that one. We have a really fantastic editor named Chai Digdary, and he comes from the New York Times most recently, who is much cooler than me, and is friends. I'm at this point what they call us geriatric millennials, you know.
Right. Well, imagine what I am.
Yeah.
I'm just geriatric. You can drop the millennial.
Uh, Chai put that together with some of his friends, and it's great. They actually have an organizing effort of musicians that they've brought together. So
That's awesome.
a lot of the musicians who are involved are part of the group that's doing this campaign, and so they were pretty versed in the issue, and they get something like 0.00038 cents per stream as a musician, and then you end up having to split that with the other members of your band or your project.
Right.
As we've seen over the course of the pandemic, Spotify's share price has tripled. So it's the same fundamental problem that we've just been discussing in media, where you have a monopoly that has taken control over the industry, and the workers, in this case, the musicians, are not benefiting from that monopoly in a meaningful way. And one of the biggest challenges with them, which is something you kind of see with Uber and Lyft as well, is that they don't treat because they have the notion of being a platform, they don't think of the musicians as being workers, right? As contributing, as producing the product that they are selling. They look at the musicians as clients or as customers, right? And so they don't feel like they owe them any kind of protections or sharing in the value that they're producing. So
who stood up for us? First of all, producer Troy. My producer Troy Miller is probably saying, "We're on Spotify. This show is on Spotify."
Well, I mean, Spotify is great as a product. I love it, but I just mean
I use it. But who wound up standing up for us musicians and songwriters? Taylor Swift.
Uh-huh.
So thank you, Taylor Swift. But by the way, I wrote about this years ago, and somebody started sending me these nasty comments. I'm a musician and I make a great living, and what are you complaining about? And I wrote back and said, well, what kind of music do you do? And he said, I'm in a Led Zeppelin cover band. And I said, well, you moron. I didn't say that, but do you think that Jimmy Page and Robert Plant would have written those songs and run that band if there was no way to make a living? And your living depends on the fact that we didn't always have this exploitative system we have today. And the point, of course, being that a decade or 2 decades from now, we may not have, music in its current form if you can't sustain yourself as a working musician.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially during the pandemic when there wasn't live shows, which is, a really significant percentage of a lot of these folks' income, they were just in a really difficult situation. And as Spotify's, stock prices tripling, the amount of revenue that they're gaining from their streams is flatlining. So, I think their demand of a cent per stream is pretty reasonable. Spotify is an extremely profitable multinational corporation, and sort of the least they could do for folks.
Well, I encourage people to check out what you guys are doing in all of these areas. There's a great variety of topics. Again, the website is perfectunion.us. The organization is More Perfect Union, and my guest has been Max Berger of More Perfect Union. So, Max, thanks for all the great work you're doing, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure here, too. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.